Dear Debbie summary, an ending explained. Freida McFadden's twisted revenge thriller. Debbie Mullen's Revenge. Secrets and final twist explained. Dear Debbie is a standalone psychological thriller by Freida McFadden, published on January 27, 2026, by Poisoned Pen Press. McFadden's official description presents Debbie Mullen as a successful local advice columnist whose apparently manageable life begins collapsing when she loses her job. Problems emerge around her teenage daughters, and she becomes convinced that her husband is hiding something. The book combines domestic suspense with black comedy and revenge fiction. Its narrative moves among Debbie, her husband Cooper, and other characters, while periodically inserting increasingly disturbing unpublished drafts from Debbie's advice column. Kirkus described the result as revenge fiction built around an increasingly unconventional antihero, while the novel's structure repeatedly encourages readers to misinterpret what they are seeing. That misdirection is crucial. Dear Debbie initially appears to be the story of a suburban woman having some kind of breakdown. It gradually becomes the story of a highly intelligent woman who has been hiding far more than anybody around her understands. The big idea of the book. Debbie Mullen has spent much of her adult life being underestimated. People see a housewife. Her neighbors see someone slightly dull. Members of her book club assume she lacks intelligence because she never completed university. Her personal trainer Harley thinks Debbie is sweet but somewhat dim. That version of Debbie is dangerously incomplete. Debbie once studied computer science at MIT. She's technically gifted enough to build sophisticated software. She cultivates plants with properties most of her family does not understand. She notices details other people miss. More importantly, she has developed a habit of allowing people to underestimate her, because being underestimated gives her room to operate. The central pressure in Dear Debbie, therefore, comes from a clash between appearance and capability. Debbie appears powerless while quietly acquiring power. She appears forgetful while remembering everything. She appears naive while manipulating other people. She appears to be the person receiving humiliation, when, increasingly, she is the person deciding what the consequences of that humiliation will be. The novel pushes that idea into deliberately uncomfortable territory. What happens when someone who has spent years feeling ignored decides that ordinary justice is no longer enough? The story in one flow. Debbie Mullen's carefully ordered life. Debbie lives in Hingham, Massachusetts, with her husband Cooper and their teenage daughters, Alexa, usually called Lexi, and Isabel, known as Izzy. Her daughters are becoming increasingly independent. Lexi is a senior whose relationship with her boyfriend Zane worries Debbie. Izzy loves football, soccer in the American setting, but abruptly disappears from her school team. Debbie herself occupies an odd position. She describes herself primarily through domestic life, yet she has genuine accomplishments. She writes a popular local advice column called Dear Debbie for the Hingham household, and her garden is impressive enough to attract interest from Home Gardening magazine. The gap between what Debbie has achieved and how little she seems to value herself is one of the story's earliest clues. Then several frustrations arrive almost simultaneously. Her noisy neighbor Brett Carlson accuses Debbie of deliberately cutting the electricity supplying his home office. Debbie denies it. The reader quickly has reason to suspect otherwise. When journalists are supposed to photograph Debbie's garden, the visit is canceled. Instead, they choose the rose garden belonging to Debbie's neighbor Joe Dolan. Joe does not merely benefit from the situation. She takes visible pleasure in Debbie's disappointment. Debbie responds by visiting a gardening shop and buying Japanese beetle attractants without purchasing the traps designed to contain the insects. Her intention becomes clear later. The beetles devastate Joe's roses and destroy the magazine opportunity that Joe took from her. It is petty, it is calculated, and it establishes Debbie's preferred method of retaliation. She rarely explodes immediately. She solves the problem. The advice Debbie cannot publish. Between ordinary chapters, McFadden inserts drafts of replies Debbie has written to people seeking advice. The contrast is one of the book's funniest and darkest mechanisms. Debbie can begin sensibly. A person describes a husband who refuses to compromise, a family that does not appreciate breakfast, or some other recognizable domestic irritation. Then the advice escalates. Instead of merely communicating better or setting boundaries, Debbie imagines coercion, poisoning, or violence. The published version may be respectable. The draft reveals what Debbie actually thinks. These interludes initially appear exaggerated enough to be black comedy. Their deeper purpose becomes apparent as the plot develops. Debbie possesses a moral framework in which wrongdoing should produce consequences, and she is increasingly frustrated by systems that allow unpleasant people to escape them. The drafts become a map of her anger. Cooper's career collapses. Meanwhile, Cooper is dealing with his own humiliation. He works for accountant Ken Bryant and expects that years of dedication will finally result in partnership. Instead, Ken rejects him. Cooper impulsively threatens to resign. Ken accepts. Suddenly, Cooper has effectively talked himself out of his own job, but he cannot bring himself to tell Debbie immediately. That secrecy matters because McFadden is simultaneously planting evidence, suggesting that Cooper may be having an affair. He receives calls from a woman. He hides them. He worries about Debbie seeing his phone. Later, he switches off Findly, the location-sharing application Debbie developed for the family, before leaving the house. Everything about his behavior invites suspicion. Yet Cooper's own narration consistently tells another story. He admires Debbie. He considers himself lucky to have married her. He remains attracted to her. He worries that she deserves somebody better than him. The contradiction is deliberate. The external evidence seems to say affair. Cooper's internal voice says something more complicated is happening. Debbie loses her column. Debbie then suffers a professional blow of her own. A woman has written to Dear Debbie explaining that her husband controls the household finances, restricts her access to money, and prevents her from developing financial independence. Debbie advises her to leave. The woman follows that advice. Her husband responds by going after the newspaper. Garrett Mears, Debbie's editor, decides that Debbie's advice is incompatible with the publication's family-friendly identity and fires her. For Debbie, this is more than losing a small job. The column gives her intellectual purpose. Her daughters no longer need her in the way young children once did. Her academic ambitions disappeared decades earlier. The garden matters because it gives her something she can build and perfect. The column provides something similar. Now both sources of validation have been attacked in the space of a day. Debbie begins acting less like an irritated suburban mother and more like somebody keeping a list. The book club gets sick. Another humiliation arrives through Debbie's book club. Harley Siburn, a personal trainer Debbie considers one of her closest friends, accompanies her to a meeting with wealthy neighbors, including Rochelle. The women patronize Debbie. Her unfinished education becomes a weapon against her. They imply she lacks the sophistication to understand the book they are discussing and move towards excluding her from the group. Then the women become violently ill. Harley does not. The reason is hidden in plain sight. Debbie brought sandwiches containing avocado, despite knowing Harley is allergic, and therefore would not eat them. The others did. What looks like Debbie forgetting Harley's allergy is actually evidence that Debbie remembered it perfectly. This is one of McFadden's most important early reversals. Debbie does not merely hide intelligence. She can manufacture stupidity as camouflage. Izzy and Coach Pike. Izzy's sudden departure from the football team becomes Debbie's next concern. Izzy initially claims she quit because schoolwork is becoming overwhelming. Debbie does not believe her when she confronts Coach Pike. She discovers behavior that makes her increasingly uncomfortable. Pike comments on Izzy's weight and suggests that her body makes her unsuitable for the team. Debbie also perceives his attention towards women and girls as deeply inappropriate. She leaves furious. Soon afterwards, an anonymous complaint alerts authorities to cameras associated with the girls' locker room. Police investigate. Evidence found on Pike's phone appears to connect him to the cameras. He insists his phone has been hacked. Debbie knows something the investigators do not. He is telling the truth about that part. She has engineered the evidence. Pike is removed. Izzy is effectively protected. And Debbie has once again imposed a punishment that the normal system had not yet delivered. The moral ambiguity becomes sharper here. Pike is presented as unpleasant and inappropriate. But Debbie is no longer merely exposing behavior. She's manufacturing evidence. Her private idea of justice is beginning to outrun any concern for process. Garrett is publicly exposed. Debbie's former editor Garrett also discovers what happens when he enters her mental ledger. After firing Debbie, Garrett accuses her of hacking the newspaper's website so that compromising footage involving him and his secretary Sierra appears publicly. Debbie denies responsibility. Again, the denial means very little. Cooper starts to realize that strange disasters seem to occur around people who have upset his wife. He does not yet understand how far the pattern goes. Cooper finally admits he lost his job. Cooper eventually tells Debbie that Ken refused his partnership request and accepted his resignation. Debbie is stunned. She knows Cooper's value to the firm and cannot understand why Ken would throw him away so easily. She promises that Ken will regret it. That sounds like emotional reassurance. Coming from Debbie, it increasingly sounds like a forecast. She later goes to Ken's house. This time she takes a gun. By this stage, the scale of Debbie's behavior has changed dramatically. Sabotaging electrical power is one category. Attracting beetles into a rival's garden is another. Making unpleasant book club members violently ill and framing a predatory coach escalate further. Walking into somebody's home carrying a gun crosses another line completely. McFadden does not immediately show the reader everything that happens there. That omission becomes essential to the ending. Harley's supposed affair with Cooper. At the same time, Harley has a secret. She believes she is having an affair with Cooper. Her chapters show a man arriving at her apartment, sleeping with her and complaining about his supposedly dead marriage. According to him, Debbie and Cooper have become strangers. He claims they barely have a relationship. Harley believes he will eventually leave Debbie and choose her. This seems to solve the mystery of Cooper switching off finally and receiving secret calls. There is only one major problem. The Cooper chapters do not fit. The Cooper we actually hear from loves Debbie. He is attracted to Debbie. His guilty secret certainly exists, but his internal thoughts do not resemble the man Harley describes. McFadden allows readers to assume one narrator is lying. The actual trick is more literal. The shirt at Harley's apartment. Debbie visits Harley and notices a man's shirt. Harley claims it is simply something she wears. Debbie smells it. Her reaction changes. The obvious interpretation is devastating. Debbie recognizes Cooper's scent and realizes her friend is sleeping with her husband. But that interpretation is wrong. Debbie recognizes the smell. She does not recognize it as Cooper's. She recognizes it from much further back in her life. That distinction will drive the entire final act. Lexi and Zane. Lexi's relationship with Zane then reveals something far uglier than teenage arguments. Zane possesses intimate images of Lexi. He is threatening to distribute them unless she gives him what he wants sexually. For Debbie, this is not simply a problem affecting her daughter. It detonates a memory she has spent decades trying to contain. Debbie attended MIT when she was younger. During her sophomore year, she went to a fraternity party. A man called Hutch drugged and raped her. The assault altered the direction of her life. She left MIT. She did not tell Cooper. She carried the experience privately for decades, along with the sense that the future she once imagined for herself had been taken from her. Lexi's situation reactivates all of it. Debbie decides Zane will not be allowed to do to her daughter what Hutch did to her. She uses Lexi's phone to lure Zane to an isolated location. She drugs his beer. When he becomes unconscious, she accesses his phone, removes Lexi's photographs, and discovers evidence suggesting he has targeted other girls. She sends that information to people capable of investigating him. When Zane later arrives at the Mullen house, Debbie makes sure he understands what can happen to sexual offenders. He leaves frightened. Debbie considers the problem handled. Zane's crash forces a moral question. But Zane does not simply disappear. After being called to the principal's office, he drinks and crashes his vehicle into the school. Lexi is devastated. Debbie is confused by her reaction. From Debbie's perspective, Zane threatened her daughter and has now been removed from her life. Problem solved. Lexi sees a human being she once cared about badly hurt. That difference matters. Debbie has begun reducing complicated human situations into binary categories: victim, predator, friend, enemy, deserving, undeserving. Once somebody enters the wrong category, Debbie can increasingly justify almost anything that happens to them. When Zane crashes, she insists she did not force him to drink or press the accelerator. Technically, she did not. Morally, the connection is more difficult to dismiss. That is one of the novel's central questions. How much responsibility does Debbie accept for consequences she deliberately sets in motion, but does not physically complete herself? Usually, very little. Debbie returns to MIT. The resurfacing of her rape overwhelms Debbie. She travels back to MIT and visits the fraternity connected to what happened decades earlier. Her plan is extreme. She considers burning the building down. Yet this episode produces one of the few moments when Debbie deliberately chooses not to punish somebody. A current fraternity member explains the measures now taken to discourage drink spiking and sexual assault. Debbie realizes the young men currently occupying the building were not responsible for what happened to her. Destroying their home would punish people for somebody else's crime. She abandons the plan. That decision is important because it prevents Debbie from becoming a completely mechanical revenge machine. She can still distinguish between vengeance and justice. The problem is that she makes that distinction entirely on her own terms. Cooper starts following the evidence. Back home, Lexi and Izzy discover Debbie's unpublished advice drafts. They find repeated suggestions of violence and murder. What once functioned as dark humor for the reader becomes terrifying evidence for Debbie's family. They tell Cooper. He examines finally and retraces Debbie's recent movements. One location alarms him. Ken Bryant's house. Cooper goes there. Ken is supposed to be away fishing. Instead, Cooper finds him dead in bed from a gunshot wound. He immediately fears Debbie is responsible. Then he remembers his gun. If Debbie has taken Cooper's weapon, he could potentially be implicated. He returns home and discovers the gun safe empty. From Cooper's perspective, the nightmare seems obvious. His wife may have murdered his former boss. Worse, she may believe Cooper betrayed her and be preparing to frame him. The audience is encouraged to fear the same thing. Once again, McFadden is pointing suspicion in approximately the correct direction while keeping the underlying mechanism hidden. Cooper's real secret. Cooper's mysterious behavior is finally explained. The woman repeatedly calling him is not a lover. She is his Alcoholics Anonymous sponsor. Cooper has struggled with alcohol dependency since his college years. He has hidden that part of himself from Debbie throughout their marriage. After losing his job, he relapsed. His secret trips and disabled location tracking have been connected to his drinking and recovery rather than infidelity. This revelation transforms the marriage plot. Debbie and Cooper have both spent years protecting themselves through secrecy. Cooper believes hiding his addiction prevents Debbie from seeing him differently. Debbie believes hiding her rape prevents Cooper from seeing her differently. Both interpret concealment as protection. Instead, it creates an information vacuum in which suspicion grows. The marriage is not collapsing because either partner has stopped caring. It is collapsing because each partner has decided the other cannot safely know the truth. The moment everything changes, Harley invites Debbie to dinner. She also invites the man she believes is Cooper. Her objective is cruel but straightforward: force Debbie to discover the affair in person. Harley prepares for confrontation. Debbie arrives. Then, the man appears. Debbie calls him Jesse. The entire narrative suddenly rearranges itself. Harley has not been sleeping with Cooper Mullen. She has been sleeping with Cooper's colleague, Jesse Hutchinson, who has been pretending to be Cooper. And Jesse Hutchinson is not merely Cooper's colleague. He is Hutch, the man who raped Debbie at MIT. The mysterious shirt at Harley's apartment was therefore not evidence of Cooper's affair. Debbie recognized Jesse's smell because it triggered her memory of Hutch. This is the central twist because it connects nearly every apparently separate strand of the book. Debbie's college trauma, Harley's affair, Cooper's coworker, the stolen gun, Ken Bryant's death, Debbie's increasing obsession with revenge. They are not parallel stories. They have been converging. The final confrontation. Debbie has known Jesse's identity longer than the reader realizes. When Jesse entered Cooper's professional life, Debbie recognized him. She began planning. The revelation changes the meaning of her actions around Ken Bryant. Debbie stole Jesse's gun. She used it to kill Ken. That creates a trail, leading not to Cooper, but to Jesse. Now Harley has placed Jesse in the perfect location for Debbie's final move. Debbie drugs Jesse until he is incapacitated. She shoots Harley using Jesse's gun. Her intended scene will tell a simple story to investigators. Jesse killed Harley and then killed himself. Jesse becomes the perpetrator. Debbie disappears from the narrative. It is perhaps the purest expression of Debbie's character. She does not merely want revenge. She wants the evidence to tell the story she has chosen. That obsession with controlling interpretation connects her technical intelligence, her advice column, her manipulation of Pike's phone, and her ability to weaponize other people's assumptions. Debbie understands systems. So she learns to make systems reach the conclusion she wants. Why Debbie does not kill Jesse. Debbie prepares to finish the plan. Jesse is unconscious. The gun is available. She can kill the man who raped her and potentially make his death look self-inflicted. Then she hears Cooper outside. He has tracked her through finally and is searching for her. His presence changes the emotional calculation. Debbie ultimately does not kill Jesse. Instead, she fires the gun without delivering the fatal shot she originally contemplated. She leaves Jesse alive to face what comes next. That distinction is essential to understanding the ending. Debbie has committed murder. She has framed people. She is capable of enormous cruelty. But when confronted directly with the person responsible for one of the defining traumas of her life, she stops short of personally executing him. Whether that represents moral recovery, tactical calculation, or simply another form of punishment is left deliberately unsettled. The ending explained. Debbie and Cooper finally begin telling each other truths. Cooper admits his alcohol dependency. The secret phone calls were connected to his recovery. The unexplained absences were not evidence of another woman. He has been ashamed and frightened of Debbie's reaction. Debbie, in turn, reveals that she was raped at university and that the assault caused her to leave MIT. It is the secret around which much of her adult identity has been built. Cooper finally understands why his exceptionally intelligent wife abandoned a future that once appeared enormous. He asks about Ken. Debbie does not tell him everything. She maintains enough deception to protect herself. The marriage, therefore, enters a strange new phase. They become more truthful. They do not become completely truthful. 1 year later. The epilogue jumps forward 1 year. Cooper has established his own accounting firm. Debbie has transformed her technical abilities into commercial success by developing an application. The couple attends therapy and works on the damage created by years of secrecy. Their family survives. On the surface, Debbie has finally reclaimed several versions of the life she lost. She has an intellectual project. She has professional success. Her marriage remains intact. Her daughters are moving forward. But Jesse's story has continued separately. He is convicted for crimes Debbie successfully connected to him. While in prison, other inmates discover his history of sexual violence. He is killed. Debbie never had to execute him herself. The system she manipulated completes the punishment. Then McFadden provides one final twist, the final Cindy reveal. Ken Bryant's murder was not simply an impulsive response to Cooper losing his job. Ken had another connection to Debbie. His wife Cindy had previously written to Dear Debbie describing financial abuse within her marriage. Debbie encouraged her to leave him. Cindy did. Ken retaliated by making the situation financially painful and by pursuing the newspaper responsible for the advice. That chain of events contributed directly to Debbie being fired. Debbie later became personally involved in helping Cindy rebuild her life. Therefore, Ken was already on Debbie's radar, long before Cooper's career crisis. The apparent motive? Revenge because Ken rejected Cooper's partnership, concealed the real one. Debbie killed Ken partly as an act of vigilante protection for Cindy, and simultaneously used Ken's death as a way to strengthen the case against Jesse. It is the final confirmation that Debbie has been operating several moves ahead of almost everyone around her. The main characters inside the story. Debbie Mullen. Debbie is both protagonist and threat. She wants control, recognition, and safety. What she fears most deeply is powerlessness. Her MIT background matters because it destroys the assumption that she is an ordinary suburban woman who suddenly becomes clever when the plot requires it. Her intelligence has always existed. Trauma redirected her life, and domesticity obscured her capabilities from people who increasingly mistake invisibility for incompetence. Her tragedy is not that she lacks agency. It is that she eventually begins treating agency and domination as almost interchangeable. Cooper Mullen. Cooper functions as the novel's most important false suspect. His secrecy resembles infidelity, yet his internal perspective repeatedly demonstrates genuine love for Debbie. His actual secret is alcoholism and relapse. That makes Cooper a thematic mirror of his wife. Both conceal painful truths because they fear judgment. Both insist secrecy protects the marriage. Both therefore help create the mistrust that nearly destroys it. Harley Sibbern. Harley sees herself as confident, sexually powerful, and capable of controlling relationships. Yet she is also being deceived. She believes Jesse is Cooper. Her supposed power over Debbie's marriage is therefore largely imaginary. Harley's willingness to befriend Debbie, while pursuing the man she believes is Debbie's husband, makes her behavior intentionally difficult to sympathize with. Still, Debbie murdering her demonstrates how thoroughly Debbie's moral boundaries have deteriorated. Being cruel does not make Harley's execution justice. That distinction is deliberately uncomfortable. Jesse Hutchinson. Hutch. Jesse is the hidden link between Debbie's past and present. As Hutch, he raped Debbie after drugging her at university. As Jesse, he enters Cooper's professional life decades later. As Harley's supposed Cooper, he creates another layer of deception. His eventual framing is possible precisely because he has constructed false identities and harmed multiple women himself. Debbie turns his habit of deception against him. Lexi Mullen. Lexi creates the emotional trigger that forces Debbie's buried trauma back into consciousness. Zane's sexual blackmail connects Debbie's daughter to the same broader issue of sexual coercion that shaped Debbie's own life. Yet Lexi also becomes an important moral counterweight. When Zane is seriously hurt, Lexi does not experience Debbie's satisfaction. She reminds both Debbie and the reader that eliminating a threat and healing the damage caused by that threat are not the same thing. Izzy Mullen. Izzy's experience with Coach Pike brings body policing, adult authority, and sexual unease into the story. Debbie's instinct to protect her daughter is understandable. Her method, manufacturing incriminating digital evidence, is not. Izzy therefore becomes one of the earliest examples of the book's central moral trap. The reader can agree that Debbie has identified someone troubling while still rejecting the method she chooses to remove him. What the book is really about: the danger of being underestimated. Debbie's greatest practical advantage is that people think they understand her. They do not. Her neighbors perceive a slightly obsessive housewife. Harley views her as intellectually limited. The book club women treat her unfinished education as proof of stupidity. Even Debbie sometimes narrates herself as though her life has become small. But small life and small mind are not the same thing. McFadden repeatedly weaponizes that distinction. Debbie's invisibility gives her access. People reveal things around her. They fail to suspect her. They explain away mistakes as incompetence. That makes underestimation the novel's most important power dynamic. Secrecy is not the same as safety. Debbie hides her rape. Cooper hides his addiction. Lexi initially hides Zane's blackmail. Izzy hides what happened around Coach Pike. Jesse hides his identity from Harley. Harley hides the relationship from Debbie, while simultaneously wanting Debbie eventually to discover it. Almost every major conflict involves somebody controlling information. The novel's marriages and relationships do not become dangerous only because people lie. They become dangerous because each person believes they have a legitimate reason to decide what somebody else should be allowed to know. Justice versus control. Debbie genuinely protects people. She also commits murder. Both statements are necessary. Reducing her either to feminist avenger or psychopathic killer misses what makes the novel entertaining. Her targets frequently behave badly. That makes her revenge emotionally satisfying. Yet McFadden repeatedly increases the punishment beyond the original offense, until readers are forced to notice that Debbie no longer wants proportional justice. She wants control over outcomes. That is far more dangerous. What most summaries miss. The most interesting twist is not simply that Jesse is Hutch. It is that Dear Debbie repeatedly trains readers to use the same lazy assumptions that characters use against Debbie. We see a housewife and underestimate her. We see Cooper hiding calls from a woman and assume infidelity. We see Harley describing Cooper and assume she must mean the Cooper whose chapters we have been reading. We see Debbie react to a shirt and assume she recognizes her husband. McFadden's trick is therefore not based solely on withholding information. It exploits the reader's willingness to complete incomplete information. Debbie survives by letting people do exactly that. What most people misunderstand. A shallow reading treats Debbie's transformation as though she suddenly becomes dangerous after one catastrophic day. She does not. The opening chapters already imply that the transformation happened much earlier. Brett's electricity has apparently been sabotaged. Debbie possesses plants she has not fully explained to her family. Her unpublished advice drafts already contain violent fantasies. She knows how to hide intelligence behind incompetence. The important change is therefore not that Debbie discovers revenge. It is that circumstances give her permission to stop suppressing a part of herself that already existed. The strongest scene, chapter, or idea. The Harley dinner reveal is the book's strongest structural sequence. Until then, the reader has two apparently incompatible pieces of information. Harley appears to be sleeping with Cooper. Cooper appears devoted to Debbie. Most thrillers would resolve this by revealing that Cooper's narration was dishonest. McFadden instead reveals that Harley's assumption about her lover's identity is wrong. When Debbie addresses Harley's boyfriend as Jesse, the story forces the reader to recalculate dozens of earlier details at once. The best twists do not merely surprise. They make earlier scenes mean something different. This one does. The tailored interpretation. Dear Debbie is ultimately about what happens when competence grows inside invisibility. Debbie's violence attracts attention because it is extreme. But the more interesting story is what happened before the novel began. A highly intelligent young woman experiences an assault that derails her education. She builds another life. That life is not worthless. She loves her husband and daughters, but part of her remains conscious of the person she might have become. Over time, she becomes exceptionally competent at managing a household while the outside world increasingly treats that competence as ordinary. Her anger is therefore larger than any single neighbor, editor, boyfriend, or boss. Every insult touches a buried belief that her life was reduced by somebody else's actions, and that people continue to mistake what remains for weakness. That does not justify what Debbie does. It explains why control becomes intoxicating. Once she begins proving that she can alter outcomes, she struggles to stop. Why this book still matters. Despite its deliberately exaggerated revenge thriller plot, the social mechanism underneath Dear Debbie is recognizable. People routinely confuse visible status with actual capability. Unpaid domestic labor can become invisible. Parents can lose parts of their identity as children become independent. Professional shame can encourage secrecy. Sexual violence can alter lives long after the immediate event. Relationships can deteriorate not because love disappears, but because both people independently decide honesty is too dangerous. McFadden packages those ideas inside something far faster, funnier, and more violent than literary domestic fiction. That accessibility is part of the book's appeal. The story can be enjoyed as chaotic revenge entertainment. There is still something more unsettling underneath it. If you only remember 3 ideas. 1. Debbie's greatest weapon is other people's assumptions. Her intelligence matters, but being underestimated makes that intelligence far more effective. People see what they expect to see. Debbie learns how to exploit the gap. 2. The marriage crisis is built on mutual secrecy rather than lost love. Cooper's hidden calls are connected to alcoholism and recovery, while Debbie's deepest secret is the rape that derailed her university life. Both believe silence protects them from rejection. Instead, silence makes each partner frighteningly easy to misunderstand. 3. Debbie's justice becomes dangerous when she alone decides what punishment people deserve. Many of her targets behave terribly. That is exactly why the moral problem works. The reader can understand the anger while recognizing that sympathy for the motive cannot automatically justify the method. The sentence that explains the book. Dear Debbie is the story of a woman everyone mistakes for powerless, discovering that once she controls the evidence, the secrets, and the consequences, she can make almost anyone else look powerless instead. The real-life test. The useful lesson in Dear Debbie has nothing to do with copying Debbie's revenge. It concerns assumptions. When somebody appears ordinary, quiet, or dependent, how much are you inferring from status rather than evidence? When a partner hides something, do you know what the secret is? Or are you constructing an explanation from incomplete information? When you believe somebody deserves consequences, are you still interested in facts and proportionality? Or have you already decided what outcome you want and begun searching for justification? Debbie becomes dangerous precisely because she stops testing her conclusions against anything outside herself. Her intelligence remains intact. Her restraint does not. That combination is more dangerous than simple irrationality. 5 questions to test whether you understood the book. Why does McFadden make Debbie significantly more intelligent than the people around her realize? How does Cooper's secret encourage both Debbie and the reader to misinterpret his behavior? At what point does Debbie move from defensible protection of her family into punishment that cannot reasonably be called justice? Why is Jessie pretending to be Cooper more effective as a twist than simply revealing that Cooper has been lying? Does Debbie's decision not to kill Jessie demonstrate genuine moral change? Or has she simply found a more effective way for somebody else to deliver the punishment? The final lesson. Debbie Mullen spends years believing that life happened to her. Someone took away the university future she expected. Her daughters grew older. Her talents became invisible inside routine. Neighbors patronized her. Friends underestimated her. Her editor discarded her. Then she discovers that she can make things happen to other people instead. That reversal is intoxicating. It is also the danger at the center of the novel. Power does not automatically repair powerlessness. Sometimes it simply reverses who gets to be afraid. The most unsettling thing about Dear Debbie is therefore not that Debbie becomes capable of violence. It is that by the final pages she has regained much of what she once believed she had lost: purpose, professional success, honesty in her marriage, and confidence in her own intelligence. Yet she still keeps one final secret. The revenge may be finished. The part of Debbie capable of delivering it is not.